A number of people have been asking me to talk about imaginative painting, impressionist style, shall we say. And so I think the most recent was Jeff, and then I have a comment now from Kofi as well. Let me read those. Would you mind reviewing how Sargent? And by the way, this is from Jeff. Jeff, excuse my paraphrasing. I believe this is what you asked, but I just phrase it in a way to be complete for the audience. So our guys can read it. Would you mind reviewing how Sargent or Benson might have created an imaginative painting, since their entire way of working was more like Velasquez and impressionistic rather than like the academic painters who worked from highly finished outline into modeling, one part after another, and then piecing the whole together? By the way, Velasquez was a different kind of painter initially, and yet those paintings where he's working at the end, those Las Meninas, and I don't know about the end, but those later pictures, when he sort of begun to be the light guy, the guy that's delivering the feeling of the sense of light, and taking that as a real value, that guy still seems to be significantly piecing these pictures together. I don't think we have any evidence of any drawings anywhere that suggests that was going on from a drawing point of view. So what we're seeing with Sargent might be in a different category slightly. And yeah, by the way, in one of those, I don't know if it was Las Meninas. Yeah, I think it was Las Meninas, where the Las Halandras is the spinners, which I find I hold to be the superior of the two. But the fact is, I haven't seen those two pictures in person. So, but the dog in the foreground definitely looks like it was pieced in afterwards, and not entirely successfully. And that's saying something from somebody who could actually skillfully do those sorts of things in the old style. So, which also suggests that it's probably not the easiest thing in the world to just simply adapt to. So let me, so Kofi says it'd be also very nice to eventually hear about Benson's imaginative paintings and what his process could have been. And, there's not a ton to say, so let's just go right into it. I mean, when I say there's not a ton to say, I have a lot of pictures. I'm going to walk us through a little bit of the history through Ang and Delacroix, whoever else I find in there. And in this one version or another of this is what happens with all the old style, what we call now academic painters. One version or another of doing drawings and putting them together into a grand scene, and then painting them one person at another, one unit after another. We know that Rubens himself actually hired different people to do different parts of his paintings. So he had certain animal painters and other maybe floral painters and that sort of thing. And so it was not only just piecemeal that the parts were all there. It was necessary, obviously, for those parts to all sort of be sitting there together in a drawing, which he did. But that then the individual parts would be put in. How I did that, I don't even think I've ever seen evidence of the precise process, which I always thought was a fascinating, corporate effort. So to Kofi and Jeff, let's have a look. As I said, it'll be a review, and then I'll go back, then I'll go quickly through Sargent. So here, by the way, the first thing I ever want to say about an imaginative painting is you have to have an idea, right? And it really is like just a scribble. So this one by Ang, the top one by Ang, which I don't know if that ever was a painting as much as it may have been a study for part of a painting. It rather looks like the garden of whatever that is with all the wormy figures all through it. Possibly. Actually, it looks more like a thumbnail. And by the way, use the word thumbnail when you're trying to come up with a picture idea. So this is the figures put together to sort of suggest a story, and then sort of framed. Typically, you'll see a framer on it. If you look down at the one below, and I'm told if I push L, let's see if my good brain is working today, I can get my little arrow. Look at that. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Producer. Brilliant, Whitaker. All right, look at this. So here we are, this, into this, into this. That's a Delacroix, but this is the frame for this little grouping here. So, did he do the grouping first, sort of thinking the frame and then put the frame on? I don't know. I mean, this stuff is all over the place. There's no absolute for that kind of stuff. But you can see what he does in general. This is an example of his just searching out figure groupings. and that sort of thing. So there's two different things happening. One is coming up with a picture idea, and the other one is doing studies from it. And in these guys' cases, it looks like from their imagination to come up with the poses they want to tell the story. And that's pretty standard, and you'll find Sargent doing the same thing and the others. So the next phase of this whole thing would be, once you get that all decided, is you begin to do drawings. And by the way, it isn't always exactly in this order. Different things happen. But then you start doing drawings from life if you're Ang. And these are very profoundly from life. They aren't, so many people think the academics are doing something else, but they are painting directly from life. Now, you could say that if Ang is trying to do a figure that represents a Greek character, then he has a tendency to idealize them to make them look like Greeks. For example, he must to get himself that knowledge must have copied some, the bust of Homer or some things like that, when he's trying to do the apotheosis of Homer, just to get a feeling, or the more anatomy that he does copy from the ancients, from the ancient Greeks, the more likely it would be that he would have his head around the Greek ideal, besides anything he might have actually been taught, which I'm not really clear about, except for the idea of 8 heads and stuff like that. In any case, you see these studies, they're just standard things. You see Michelangelo doing the same thing. Michelangelo's studies do look more like they're studies made up out of his head. I don't, some of them are so funny that they don't give any evidence of being, and I'm talking about the Libyan Sibyl, of being from life. And yet certain parts of them, like the use of the toes, the way the toes are bent back in that drawing just to the side in that picture, it's like this, where it looks like they might have been studied from life. So here are feet, here's a piece of a leg, and I'm going to show you the picture, at least that this one comes out of. That's this right here. That's the martyrdom of St. Symphorian. And here you can see that then the next thing they might do, and you could say in Ang's case, he probably did do. I mean, you could produce an entire room. I think there were 200 items in a room just for a portrait, and all these little studies of one kind and another, false starts, scribbles, thumbnails, every kind of thing you could think of, and studies for drapery and so on. But you can see the figure right here of Saint Symphorian, and then here's that worked up figure, but there's studies for parts, right? So he's getting ready to stick these people in here, and here's the character in the foreground right here, studied up. And you see him doing that without a whole lot of deviation. Now, we can't, by the way, judge between the colors of these things. We don't know if he used the actual color, if he just did these things as just as beginning points, and may have adapted the color. But I can't tell you. I wouldn't say that these two things have anything in common, but in nature they might in his situation. Anyway, so what you're seeing is color studies for parts, for individual parts, different characters in the movie, shall we say. Here's that character in the back pointing his finger, that guy right there, sitting on his horse, presumably, for which that previous one, that study might have been done. All right, so obviously you go from drawings from the figure to get the idea to then more close drawings, the stuff you're actually going to want to use, and then doing close color studies. Studies working it up with color, one individual at a time, parts at a time, as you think you need them. Now, one of the things that commonly does happen once you've done your drawings is this is Puvis, and there's a number of cases where you can see him tracing every single figure, and Ang was no enemy of tracing paper. So you can see him tracing every individual figure onto some sort of something. So maybe was it some sort of tracing paper? Could very well have been. I don't know that about this one. But you can see that in that case, he's working this up. And then he's going to do studies again, like Ang did, of the figures that eventually go into different ones of these paintings. But you can see these are just more or less line drawings. They're just simply a workup looking to be sort of the final version of that. And some of these guys will then grid these things up and then go to the wall where they're going to put it. And Puvis being a mural painter, he would then do the individual parts one at a time after tracing onto the wall, which is not unlike what Michelangelo would be doing with, and others, pouncing you take it, you have this big drawing. Actually, Blashfield does the same thing. If somebody wants to look at that, that's worth your time. But where he pounces this big angel's head that's about this, they just all the outline, and they pounce it with charcoal dust, and you leave mark on the fresco, if that's what it is, or not, and then use that as your basis to start your drawing. But these guys would be tracing it up initially, and I've never heard of anybody pouncing the whole thing, but maybe they did. I don't know the answer to that one. I'm not a mural painter. So here's the Sargent we're going to talk about, El Jalejos. This is the one that specifically Jeff and several other people actually have referred to, and it's, of course, the one that I've said. Probably I'm the guy that started this because I've said, don't you know that Sargent did imaginative paintings? And what I want to mention right here is the difference between this painting by Sargent and its impressive use of light and all that sort of thing, and its sense of light, which is very characteristic of the Impressionist mind, and the Saint Symphorian, which has, you wouldn't say it has, it lacks light, but it really is just figures. It really does, rather, in one sense, lack light. I mean, if we take anything like putting these two back and forth, they should have put them side by side. The Impressionist is about light, by the way, and by the time you get to Velázquez, it's about light, okay? It's inclusively doing light, not just figures, but getting the relationships of things such that the light of the room is actually resoundingly so. One of the things I would say, though, about the Angian version, like this, is it has this great capacity to separate you. So that your story is like an illustration. You don't want to make it so much like life that it could be somebody in your family out there. And it's very funny because I sometimes think Veronese was just doing exactly that. He was dressing up the sisters of Moses in modern garb and doing everything to make it look like it could have been that day, sort of thing. He didn't have the light of Sargent or Velázquez to help out. So one of the characteristics at the end of the day you would expect from an imaginative painting by an impressionist is light. And for that reason, you might find that their drawings are different. Well, let's see if that's the case. Well, here we are with the thumbnails or things that are in that direction. These actually look like he may have been thinking of it to do something, and he was just sitting in a room and sort of scribbling, maybe at a table or whatever. He's on the opposite side of these guys. There's a whole crowd of people probably also, as his dancer goes up and down the room. So here he is sitting, just taking notes. He's just always having that kind of a thing, going on. Pen and ink. If he was live today, it might be magic markers. But just sort of doing some scribbly thumbnails. But let's just talk about thumbnails for a second, because I've talked about this before, and I've had trouble finding. I finally got it in my hands. But this is the thumbnail for the Wyndham sisters, right? This famous painting, one of the Sargent's most astonishing pieces of work from the point of view of sort of a sense of grandeur, which he's never weak in. But this is competing with all the best of the great British painters from the generations before him. But here's the thumbnail. Here's his idea. Thumbnail just means an idea picture, right? So this is, you can see, he's just a couple little blobby head, big swinging across here with a picture up the middle. Wow, look at that. Now, this was not done after. This is what you want to get in your head. If you're any kind of an imaginative painter, you want to have a concept of where you're headed, okay? But you want to have it to be a summary concept. So it's no less true of an impressionist, okay? Now, this person then would bring these women in and paint he might paint them all at once first and then paint them together or paint them individually for parts and that sort of thing. But I've never studied the anatomy of his methodology in this picture, so I don't know that. So here he is coming up with the ideas for the poses. And these are scribbles, right? So these are just gestural line gestures in a search for a pose. And you can see that after doing all these guys here, he's starting to get close to something. This is what he ultimately uses. So how's that different from either Ang or Delacroix? It's not. Those guys are the academics. Here's the impressionist. Now, the fact that he's using line is nothing. It's just an efficiency. But you'll find him quickly going to studies that are obviously in the Velázquez model. These aren't line drawings anymore. The other guys are really always doing line drawing. Even though they put in a sense of form and that sort of thing, it always feels like a line drawing in the old way. Draw lines. But you look at the eyes here, they're blobs. This whole methodology is a blob one. And it reminds me of the memory drawings. I should have dragged one in here. This one here particularly reminds me of a very particular memory drawing that I did, where if you're trying to draw efficiently, and in an unusual light, if the lights mark out such distinctive, it's so distinctively marked out by contrast, by popping spots, that's the right way to handle it. You want to draw a face. You want to draw spots. And this is that huge advantage of the Boston, I'm sorry, which is still theirs, but of the light-oriented painter. And so, but he's not limited, and you aren't either. Nobody is limited in one way and another. I mean, some of the other studies you'll see by certain individuals, including Ang, come pretty close to doing this eventually. But they go through a longer process, a linear process, and don't get right to the point of the major masses as quick. That's just one of the things that's characteristic. Again, you'll just see this as a search for the actual gestures and expressions. This for the hand of the major figure and her head, and these for the women sitting in the background to the right of her. And so, and here's another one of the searching ones. You know, he obviously was kind of overwhelmed by that dance. Here's one of those searching, and if you've seen that before, that hand across the face sort of a thing, there must be certain steps in this particular dance. That one does remind me of the music to Bolero, which is apparently about that kind of a dance. But that's the music, Bolero by Ravel, I think. But so here, a bunch of the hands up in the air of the girls clicking their fingers, maybe in the background. There's the woman dancing, clicking her fingers. Here's one of the seated women. Study, study, study. Now, he would have had models individually come in and hold certain poses, hold their faces in certain positions and that sort of thing. Here's another one that's too hard to tell. Now, I took this out of a book. Thank you, Sean. I took this out of a book, one of the Ormond books, because I couldn't find any of these reproductions online, excuse me. And so here's now, I went through a lot of stuff looking at things. There's a whole bunch of stuff that are studies after, right? Those don't help you to get to what the guy did to get to the final painting. But possibly both of these, this one a watercolor and this one an oil painting, were characteristic of the exact same thing I talked about with Ang. This is a painting of a part of a picture. Now, he might very well, listen, he may have signed this, he might very well have then treated it, he placed it well on the page and all that sort of stuff. He was probably going to sell it. He probably sold everything, or aimed at making pictures, saleable pictures of everything he did. And but here's that classic study, exactly like the imaginative painter would do. But again, you'll see that fantastic sense of light, and the whole thing being light-driven again. As I said, this is a watercolor, and I don't know what phase it would have come in that. And thank you to whoever that is in the. Okay, now, so there's the male figures in the background, the guitarists, and these are the studies for heads. And what is that down there? Is that guitar fingers? Yeah, these are hands, fingers on the guitars. But look at the efficiencies. But this is all light-driven. This is light effect made drawing. Okay. And so if you want to call it mass drawing, that's fine. That's in that direction. It's not line drawing and noodling. You see, it's a different model from that academic one that so many of you are learning right now. And you can see how effective it is, and it looks like it's fairly quick. Well, it is fairly quick. It is quite quick if you can get your head around the games. But he doesn't run away. If he doesn't eschew line to get it set up, but it's very quickly into mass and solidly into mass, much like you'll see some of those things that I show you with the Boston School guys. And I'll show you that drawing by Benson again before this is over. So then again, more of the studies of the type that you'd say Ang did, except you can see these are impressionist studies. They're visual order studies. And the light effect is the key thing. He's really trying to get the visual order of the edges and that sort of thing. So, and it's undoubtedly using the same light in the same place. Now, the Gamma would do that. He's trying to do his imaginative work. He would, when he was doing it, he would say, I'm going to have them all in this light, and he would pose all his models over there in that side of the room so the light would come and hit them the same way. Well, it'd be the same thing here, except he'd be using an artificial light, probably, of some kind, or some other device to get these people lit more dramatically. I think none of these quite live up to what he eventually did with those heads. So as you can see in the one before, some of these things are really dramatically lit. This light coming, shooting up like here, like you like to do when you're a kid with your little kid brothers and sisters. And then finally, here's the oyster gatherers of Calais, which is the first place I actually noticed that he was piecing these pictures together. Now, Impressionism, can you do this outdoors with outline drawing? Can you actually paint an Impressionist painting? Well, no, not an imaginative one. You'd have a really wicked hard time, is the word people like to use up here in New Hampshire, doing that. But this is visual order painting again. Tons of lost and found, but again, how is it done, right? So you'll see there's a bunch of scribbles. He's doing any number of these scribbles. Now, I don't think I have a thumbnail. I don't know. I don't have a thumbnail. So I don't have one, but so at some point he came up with a picture idea. And But these are then the later studies for it. But these would have been the earlier things, much like he did when he was preparing for the El Jaleo. He just drew people on the beach looking for an idea or looking for figures that might work in his picture. So between these two, he's got the little kid and he's got the woman, the left foreground figures. And these are paintings for them, all the same exactly as Ang would have done, except that you can see he's delivering light effects, the quality of light, which isn't even close to what Ang was doing outdoors there in that picture or anything. I'd have to say, I don't think he ever did anything slightly like that. Every painting Ang did looked like it was done in a studio. No, whether it was outdoors or indoors, it didn't look like it had anything like daylight on it. Well, does that require a different modality in sketching and that sort of thing? Of course it does. It requires consistency. And of course, that light source, the sun, from a certain direction, so all the drawing studies had to be done from that light source. And that spot on the beach where you wanted people to be standing, and all those things. So nothing is different here. He just does these studies, and eventually he sorts them together. He puts them together in a picture. I wish I had one of these things that showed him in an evolutionary process. At some point, if I can find one, I'll add it to this little exercise. So, but that's the walkthrough. How is that any different, if you want to say it that way? How is that any different from imaginative painting? Of that imaginative painting of the Angian academic, the salon painter, Bouguereau, those guys. But you can see it plainly is, right? Because their motive is different. This is light-based thinking, not object-based thinking. And so the process inevitably is different, even though you have to use individual objects, humans, because you have to get individual parts into this picture. But then getting them together so they're visually unified is, you'd never have thought that, but you see pictures like that, even some of the Soroyas paintings, they were done piecemeal, part after part after part. The fact that you're on the same beach and you see the kids over and over again, probably your light, your colors, your lights, all those sorts of things, light direction, color of skin, that sort of thing, are all going to be the same, and it's going to maintain while you go through this process. Yeah, he's another guy who probably does all this imaginative stuff. Now, I'm talking as a person who's done some of this, but I haven't made my life doing this sort of thing. I would give a little nod to N.C.Wyeth, who does try to do something rather a little bit like this. He's really sort of neither in one place or the other, but I like the way he pieces pictures together, and any of these guys that do this sort of thing you can learn from, and some people's way of working may fit you better than three other guys. So let me just jump right away to the murals that were mentioned by Kofi. These are the murals of Frank Benson, the Boston School guy. And what can I say about these except that he was given an assignment of the colors and all those things were already given to him. So the turquoise is a key thing in all these pictures. And you can see it has whites, so he's referring, all the whites in there are trying to they do refer to the lights in the picture. And there's warm notes, and they can be anywhere from red to gold, so there's a whole range of stuff for them all to work in. So these are all the same colored painting, right? So that's a given. But he still will have to draw the figure from life, and his figure drawing will look like this one in the upper right. I suspect right from the beginning, I've never seen a drawing by him that was strictly outline. Every one of them has some massing going on in it. So there's no sense like he was just simply trying to get a figure by outline, which sometimes Sargent looks like he's trying to do. But it looks like these guys really do draw right away. They're mass draftsmen. They really do draw. They line into mass, if not pure mass. And this, you can see it here is an example of line into mass. But each of these heads, and this is two different murals here, and I think both of them are in the Library of Congress, but I'm not sure about that. But you can see the same thing. He would have posed the figure. He would have drawn the figure. And the figure, if he could have done it, would have had a drapery on. And he would have painted a background separately. Or he would have built a background in. The way Gamble did things, he would just come up with a design idea. Like this one here has this wonderful feeling of going on and on like this, which call this kind of travel up through the middle of the drama of the center. And this one is done differently, clearly differently, right? But but the action of this picture, this action, well, what's he going to do? Go out there and make that up? I mean, I'll go out there and find that somewhere, and I probably would have had to make it up. And knowing landscape like he did, this is actually in the sense that he's not having to draw relief and that sort of thing. It's just a matter of mass and pattern and all those sorts of things. Once you get there, he would have probably done some work on parts of that, but it doesn't look like he would have needed to. This probably would have been quite easy to do without ever doing any sketching to the background. And I would suggest probably the same thing with this one. So there might be some, obviously that's different because it's so much simpler. The same thing is true of the background of these, but some of these look more worked up, so there might have been some other activity going on beforehand in these preliminary. He probably did all this, by the way. I would say he probably did all these in a black and white. I've never seen one though, so I can't tell you that for sure. But he probably did a charcoal version of these guys, or some sort of a relatively full study. You wouldn't just go into a mural and just put in stuff like this and get it in the wrong place and then move it again. It wouldn't be the smartest thing in the world to do. You probably came in there again and you had your assignment. Now, he might have done these on canvases, and my impression is he did in his studio, and then they went up. But he would have had enough of this stuff here with him, if not an actual piece of this kind of framing. He would have had enough of this, the colors and all those other things, so he would have known what color he was working to. But so I'm really telling you, there's kind of no difference. There's a difference in that some draftsmen are mostly line and other ones are mostly mass. So the mass draftsman is the sort of the classic tonalist, which is the model that Sargent comes out of. So what I really am ending this by saying is, are there any surprises? No, I mean, it's just a logical way to proceed when you have to make stuff up. The difference is that when you're painting, when the idea is light, and these guys are far less about the light, this guy here, isn't he? Than Sargent's are, but the standards are different. And when you see the murals by Sargent in the Museum of Fine Arts, you'll see that there's no sense of light in those things to speak of. Those things are much flatter, more like this right here. So the assignment was undoubtedly significantly different. Well, in fact, a mural assignment is different. When you're doing your own stuff, if you're an impressionist and you love light, you're not going to be painting dead pictures, probably. Not too many of them. That is to say, pictures that are just about form and shape, pattern. But depending on your person, depending on your modus operandi, or what do you call that? Your general thrust in painting. So, but yeah, yeah, these are probably simpler than you think to make up, but in all cases, I would bet that these guys were doing the kind of work they did in the background here beforehand. They might have done them in oil. I've done this any number of times. Even when I paint outdoors, I paint a little version of it in oil first. I've shown you some of those. I don't think I have one here. I paint a little one in oil first, and I make adjustments in there if I see a need, or I immediately plan it differently. Sometimes I do charcoal thumbnails, but not very often. If I have nothing else in hand, I might do a charcoal thumbnail. Just to make sure I see the idea, just the design idea. But yeah, so these could very well have been worked up. I cannot tell you anything. I've never seen any of the worked up versions of these. I have seen preliminaries by N.C.Wyeth. I've seen them in person for these big mural size or pretty big pictures, small studies. But in his case too, I don't know that how much I've seen in terms of drawing. I think a lot of people have gone straight to the canvas and done their invention there in some small version. All right, I've said enough. Thank you for all your responses to that last video. I think the idea I'm doing a series of beginning things. I'll be thinking about that, believe me, but I won't. I'll probably base it on things you say to me. So if you really want me to do more stuff for beginners, don't give me a generic question. Ask me things that might relate to what you're running into, okay? And I'll be glad to do that again. But it was a nice response, and I was very pleased. And thank you, Theodore, again for your ongoing support. That's one of which showed up this week, and to the rest of you for your comments, sharing, liking, subscribing, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I'll leave it at that and see you in the next one. All right.